A woman stood inside my horse corral with her two toddlers, inches from a 1,200-pound mare's hooves. She was taking photos. I jumped out of my truck. "Get your children out of there right now." She looked annoyed. "The HOA president said this is shared community space. We're just saying hello. These are working animals. This is a 40-acre cattle ranch. You need to leave." "We'll see about that." She grabbed her kids and marched off through my pasture. What she didn't know was that the developer had fraudulently included my ranch in their master plan to get county approval. Sold 120 homes at premium prices, $7 to $12 million in markup, promising access to land they never owned. And the HOA president fighting me? She was the developer's secret business partner. There were $800,000 in profit from the fraud. 3 investment properties, all protected by keeping the lie alive. She thought cutting my fence and poisoning my cattle would force me to surrender land my family had owned for 35 years. She was wrong. By the time the jury convicted her and the judge sentenced 18 months in prison, it was too late to undo what came next. But first, let me know where you're joining us from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more engaging stories like this. A woman was letting her 2 toddlers pet my horses when I drove up. They were inside the corral, all 3 of them, with the kids reaching up toward my quarter-horse mare. The woman held a phone, taking photos while her children stood inches from a 1,200-pound animal's hooves. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the truck. "Ma'am, get your children out of there right now." She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "We're just saying hello. The HOA president said this is shared community space. These are working animals, not a petting zoo." I opened the corral gate and gestured them out. "This is private property. You need to leave. This land is open to Meadow Ridge residents." She pulled her kids away from the horse but didn't move toward the gate. "You can't keep us out." "Yes, I can. It's my ranch." "We'll see about that." She grabbed her children's hands and marched off through my pasture toward the tree line. I watched her disappear into the woods, then spent 10 minutes calming the mare who'd been spooked by the toddler's sudden movements. This was the 3rd incident this week, and it was escalating. Let me explain how it got to this point. I inherited the 40-acre cattle ranch from my uncle 6 months ago. Uncle Jim had run it for 35 years, a working operation with 30 head of cattle worth roughly $45,000, 4 horses including the $12,000 quarter-horse mare, hayfields, a barn built in the 1960s, and the ranch house where he'd lived alone after my aunt died. The property was appraised at $850,000, not counting livestock or equipment. When Uncle Jim passed and left everything to me, I quit my IT job in Denver within a month, sold my condo, moved into the ranch house, and committed to running the operation full-time. It was exactly what I wanted. 40 acres of open pasture and woods, a creek running through the eastern section, and peace. No traffic, no neighbors knocking on the door. Just land, animals, and work. Except I did have neighbors now. Meadow Ridge Estates had been built 2 years ago on adjacent land to the west. The developer had purchased a large parcel and built 120 homes. Cookie-cutter houses on quarter-acre lots marketed as a ranch living community, which apparently meant suburban houses with an HOA near actual ranch land. Uncle Jim had been alive when they'd started construction. According to his journals, a developer representative had approached him during planning, asking him to sell the ranch or grant an easement for community recreational use. Uncle Jim had refused both offers. His last journal entry about it, dated 8 months before he died, said, "Developer stopped calling. Guess they gave up." Good, this land stays in the family. He never mentioned seeing trespassers. Either they'd waited until after he died, or he'd been too sick in his final months to notice. The trespassing started about 3 months after I moved in. At first, it was just hikers walking through my back pasture. I'd ask them to leave, and they'd seem surprised. I didn't know this was private. Then it escalated. Families having picnics near the creek, kids riding bikes through pastures and spooking cattle, dog walkers letting dogs off-leash to chase my livestock. Every single time I asked someone to leave, they'd say the same thing. "The HOA told us we can be here." 3 days after the horse corral incident, I received a formal letter from the Meadow Ridge Estates HOA. The letter was on official letterhead signed by Sharon Miller, HOA president. 2 pages of authoritative language designed to intimidate. Your property is designated as community open space per the Meadow Ridge Master Plan filed with the county. All residents of Meadow Ridge Estates have recreational access rights to designated open space areas. Your recent attempts to restrict access and posting of no trespassing signs are in violation of the approved master plan. Remove all signs immediately and cease interfering with resident access. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I pulled up the Meadow Ridge HOA documents online. They were public record, filed with the county when the development was approved. The master plan included a map of the entire development. My 40-acre ranch was shaded green and labeled Community Open Space. The text beneath read, Meadow Ridge residents enjoy access to 40 acres of pristine open space, including wooded areas, to creek access, and nature trails. I found the marketing materials the developer had used to sell homes. Every brochure featured photos of open land that looked exactly like my ranch, promising buyers could hike, picnic, and explore nature on community land adjacent to your home. Then I looked up recent home sales in Meadow Ridge. Homes were selling for $380,000 to $450,000, premium prices for the area. I pulled up comparable homes in developments without amenities. Similar houses sold for $320,000 to $350,000. The 40 acres of open space added roughly $60,000 to $100,000 to each home's value. Multiply that by 120 homes, and the developer had extracted $7 to $12 million from buyers by promising access to land they never owned. If that access disappeared, every homeowner would lose $60,000 in equity overnight. There was one problem with all of this. I owned that land. It wasn't HOA property. It had never been HOA property. I attended the next HOA board meeting. It was held at their clubhouse on a Tuesday evening. About 30 residents were there, along with 5 board members sitting at a table in front. Sharon Miller sat in the center, a woman in her 50s with short blonde hair and the tense posture of someone under pressure. When they reached the open comment period, I stood up. I'm here about your master plan. You've listed my ranch as community open space. I own that land. You don't have permission to designate it as anything. The room went quiet. Sharon's smile looked forced. We need to discuss your interference with resident access. People have been complaining. It's my property. You don't own it. She pulled out a copy of the master plan. This land is clearly designated as open space in our county-approved development plan. Show me the easement. Show me any document I signed giving you access. The developer assured us they had all necessary agreements when they formed the HOA. Her voice had an edge now. 120 families bought homes based on that promise. If we lose access to this land, they'll sue the HOA. They'll sue me personally as president for failing to protect their interests. A man in his 40s raised his hand from the audience. Sharon, can I ask something? Did anyone from the HOA actually verify we had legal access to that land before we started using it? Sharon's expression tightened. The developer filed the master plan with the county. We relied on that documentation. But did anyone check the property deed? Get a title report? I'm a title insurance agent. If someone had asked me, I would have told them to verify the easement was recorded. Did anyone do that? Sharon didn't answer. The man sat back, shaking his head. We should have checked. I left the meeting and went straight home to pull my property deed. It was clear, 40 acres, legally described with exact boundaries owned by Uncle Jim since 1989, 35 years before Meadow Ridge Estates existed. No easements, no restrictions, no agreements with any HOA or developer. The developer, Summit Communities LLC, had filed the master plan with the county in 2022, showing my ranch as open space within their development boundary. And the county had approved the HOA based on that plan. But Summit had never owned my ranch, never obtained an easement, never even contacted Uncle Jim beyond those initial phone calls he'd refused. They'd just drawn a map including land they didn't own and sold homes promising access to it. The man who'd questioned Sharon caught up with me in the parking lot. I'm David Martinez, he said. I live 3 houses into the development. I want you to know, some of us think Sharon's handling this wrong. If you own that land and didn't agree, we don't have a right to be there. Tell your neighbors that. I am. Not everyone's listening yet. But some of us are. I sent Sharon a letter the next day. I own the property you've designated as community open space. Remove my property from your maps immediately. Her response came within 48 hours. These families paid $400,000 for homes with promised access to 40 acres. If I tell them that access doesn't exist, I'll have 120 lawsuits on my hands. The developer is bankrupt. We can't go after them. You're the only one we can negotiate with. I called a property attorney named Marcus Webb and explained everything. The trespassing, the master plan, the fraudulent designation. Marcus reviewed the documents. This is fraud. The developer lied to the county and to the homebuyers. They sold homes promising access to land they never owned. What about suing the developer? He pulled up a business registry. Summit Communities LLC filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 14 months ago. The principals liquidated everything and dissolved the company. There's nothing to recover. So the HOA is stuck. They can sue you for access, but they won't win. They can sue the developer, but there's no money. Or they accept reality. They bought homes based on fraudulent marketing. It's not your responsibility to solve their problem. Sharon's going to keep pushing. Probably. Because the alternative is admitting to 120 families she can't deliver what they paid for. That weekend, I found out how desperate Sharon really was. I was working on the tractor when I saw a crowd walking through my south pasture. 30, maybe 40 people with backpacks and water bottles. Sharon led them, pointing out landscape features like a tour guide. Away I drove out in my truck. This is a community nature walk, she said when I confronted her. These families paid premium prices for homes with access to this land. You're trespassing, all of you. Leave now. If we can't access this land, every homeowner loses $60,000 in equity. I'm not letting that happen. I called the sheriff. A deputy arrived and reviewed my deed and their master plan. This is a civil property dispute, he said. But ma'am, if he owns the land and he's asking you to leave, you need to leave. The crowd dispersed. Sharon left last, her face tight with anger. An hour later, my neighbor called. Your cattle are on Highway 34. I drove out and found 6 of my cows in the middle of the highway, not on the shoulder in the actual traffic lanes. A semi-truck was stopped 50 feet away, hazard lights flashing. The driver stood outside his cab, hands on his head. They came out of nowhere, he said. I almost didn't stop in time. If I'd been going full speed... He didn't finish. One cow had a cut on her leg from barbed wire. Another was limping from slipping on asphalt. If that driver had been going 5 miles per hour faster, I would have had dead cattle and possibly a dead truck driver. It took me 2 hours to round them up. The gate to my south pasture was wide open. Someone from the nature walk had left it unlocked. When I got back to the ranch house, I sat on the porch and looked at my 40 acres. The land Uncle Jim had protected for 35 years and explicitly refused to give the developer. I called Marcus. Someone from Sharon's nature walk left my gate open. 6 cattle got onto the highway. A semi almost hit them. Are you okay? I'm done asking them to stop. I paused. I'm fencing the entire property line, and when 120 families realized they didn't buy access to 40 acres, they bought quarter-acre lots next to someone else's ranch. Sharon's going to have a lot of angry homeowners at her door. Not mine. The woman with the stroller was crying when she confronted me at the new fence. Do you understand what you've done? Her voice shook. My husband and I paid $430,000 for our house because of this land. We're both teachers. We saved for 8 years, and now we find out it was a lie. We overpaid by $60,000 we don't have. I looked at her through the fence. 12 other HOA residents stood behind her, some angry, some just defeated. I'm sorry you were defrauded, I said. But it wasn't by me. You're the one with the fence. It's my property. It always was. She stared at me for a long moment, then walked away, pushing the stroller back toward Meadow Ridge. The fence had gone up 4 days earlier. The contractor arrived on a Monday morning with 3 crews and enough material to surround 40 acres. 6-foot cattle fence with 3 strands of barbed wire on top, heavy steel gates at every access point, and commercial-grade locks. You want signs? The foreman asked. Every 100 feet. Private property, no trespassing, working ranch. The installation took 4 days and cost $35,000. By Friday afternoon, my entire property was secured behind a fence that made it crystal clear where my land began and everyone else's ended. Sharon called an emergency HOA meeting that Saturday night. I didn't attend, but David Martinez, the title insurance agent who'd questioned Sharon at the previous meeting, texted me updates. 80-plus homeowners here. Sharon saying you illegally fenced off community land. People are angry. Someone asked if you actually own it. Sharon says the land is designated as open space in county records. Still not answering directly. Vote to authorize legal action against you? Just passed 62 to 18. The lawsuit arrived by courier on Tuesday. The HOA was suing me for interference with easement rights, breach of community access agreement, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They wanted me to remove the fence, grant them a permanent recreational easement over my entire 40 acres, and pay their legal fees. They'd also filed for a preliminary injunction to force fence removal while the case proceeded. Marcus filed a counter lawsuit the same week. We sued the HOA and Summit Communities LLC for fraud, trespass, property damage from the cattle escape, and defamation. We demanded $500,000 in damages and a restraining order prohibiting HOA residents from accessing my property. Summit Communities is bankrupt, Marcus reminded me. We won't collect anything from them, but it establishes the fraud on the record. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the HOA hired an appraiser to quantify the damage of losing access to my ranch. The appraisal report was damning. For them, homes in Meadow Ridge had sold for $50,000 to $80,000 above comparable properties in nearby developments. The premium was entirely attributable to the promised 40 acres of community open space. Without that access, where the report estimated homes were worth 15 to 20% less than purchase price. Total loss to homeowners, $6 to $10 million in property value. Sharon took the report to the local news. The story ran that Thursday, ranch owner blocks community open space, home values plummet. Sharon was interviewed standing in front of my new fence. Our residents are devastated. Children can't play in nature anymore. Families who paid premium prices for homes with promised amenities are now trapped in properties worth less than they paid. This man is destroying our community out of spite. The reporter called me for comment. Marcus had told me not to talk to media, so I declined. That made me look guilty in the story, like I had something to hide. The comments section online was brutal. Greedy rancher cares more about cows than kids. Hope he's happy destroying 120 families. Someone should teach him what community means. The harassment started that weekend. Saturday morning, I found a section of fence cut. Someone had used wire cutters on 3 strands, creating a gap large enough to walk through. I repaired it and checked the security cameras I'd installed. No footage. They'd cut a section the cameras didn't cover. Sunday, 2 more sections were cut. I installed additional cameras. Monday, I found my ranch truck keyed in the grocery store parking lot. 4 long scratches down the driver's side. $2,000 in damage. Tuesday, an envelope with no return address arrived at my mailbox. Inside was a note written in block letters. Your cattle aren't safe, neither are you. And leave while you can. I filed police reports for all of it. The deputy who responded was sympathetic but realistic. Property disputes bring out the worst in people. We'll increase patrols, but we can't watch your place 24/7. The preliminary injunction hearing happened on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed. At least 40 HOA residents showed up to watch. The HOA's attorney argued for 30 minutes. Your Honor, homeowners relied on open space access when purchasing their properties. It was explicitly promised in marketing materials and included in the county-approved master plan. Removing that access now causes immediate and irreparable harm to property values and quality of life. The ranch owner installed this fence in bad faith, specifically to harm the community. Marcus stood up. Your Honor, my client owns the land. And the HOA has no recorded easement, no written agreement, and no legal right to access his property. The developer defrauded the county and homebuyers by including land in their master plan that they never owned and had no permission to use. My client is simply protecting his property rights. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, looked at the HOA attorney. Does your client have any written agreement with the property owner granting access? The master plan constitutes a binding agreement, Your Honor. It was filed with the county and approved as part of the development. The master plan is a document between the developer and the county. It's not a contract with a third-party property owner. Judge Morrison flipped through the file. I don't see any recorded easement. Ooh, I don't see any agreement signed by the ranch owner or his predecessor. Motion for preliminary injunction denied. Several HOA residents groaned. Sharon's face went pale. The HOA doubled down. They hired a second attorney and started discovery. Marcus deposed Sharon 3 weeks later. Mrs. Miller, when did you first learn that the ranch property wasn't actually owned by the HOA? Sharon shifted in her seat. We were told by the developer that it was included in the development plan. That's not what I asked. When specifically did you learn that the ranch owner had never agreed to provide access? After he attended our board meeting, which was approximately 13 months ago. Yes. So you've known for over a year that your residents were trespassing on his property without permission? We believed we had legal rights based on the master plan. Did you consult an attorney to verify those rights? Sharon hesitated. The master plan was filed with the county. We relied on that. You never verified whether you actually had legal access rights, even after the property owner explicitly told you he'd never granted permission. Some HOA residents started doing their own research. David Martinez posted in the Meadow Ridge Facebook group with property records showing that my ranch had never been part of the HOA, had never been owned by Summit Communities, and had no recorded easements. The comments exploded. We were lied to by the developer. Sharon knew and didn't tell us. We're trespassing on someone's working ranch. We could all be sued individually. Why did Sharon keep telling us we had rights when she knew we didn't? David sent me a text the next morning. Found something. Sharon owns 3 properties in Meadow Ridge. Her house plus 2 rental properties she bought as investments. If property values drop 15 to 20%, she personally loses $180,000 to $240,000 in equity across all 3. She's not just protecting the community, she's protecting her own portfolio. I forwarded the message to Marcus. That explains why she's so desperate, he said. She has triple the financial exposure of a regular homeowner. She's facing a $250,000 loss personally. Within 48 hours, David's post had 87 comments and 45 shares within the Meadow Ridge Facebook group. The community was fracturing. Sharon's supporters, roughly 60%. We paid for that land. He's being selfish. We need to keep fighting. David's faction, roughly 30%. Sharon knew we were trespassing and never told us. She's protecting herself, not us. Undecided, roughly 10%. I just want my property value back. I don't care how. A petition started circulating to recall Sharon as HOA president. Within a week, it had 35 signatures. Not enough to force a vote, they needed 60, but enough to show David's faction was growing. Meanwhile, Marcus kept digging into Summit Communities' fraud. The county's zoning code required 30% open space for developments over 100 homes. May's Summit had 120 homes on 45 acres of residential lots. They needed at least 20 acres of open space. They only owned 5 acres, a small park and retention pond. So they'd drawn my 40-acre ranch into their master plan to get the numbers up to 45 acres total. Without fraudulently including my land, the county never would have approved the development. They used your property to get government approval, Marcus explained. Then they sold homes promising access to your property. The entire development is built on fraud. The next morning, I was checking fence lines when I found bolt cutters lying on the ground near the south gate. A large section of fence had been cut open, not just a few strands, but an entire panel destroyed. I called Marcus about the footage, then immediately drove out to assess the damage. 6 of my cattle had already found the gap and were heading east through the woods, directly toward the tree line that bordered Highway 34. I grabbed 2 horses and spent the next hour rounding them up. 1 cow had already reached the fence line near the highway when I cut her off. Another 30 seconds and she would have been on the road again. I thought about the semi-truck driver from 2 weeks ago, hands on his head, saying, I almost didn't stop in time. Sharon's fence cutting wasn't just property destruction. It was creating a recurring threat to public safety. I checked the security camera footage on my phone. The video showed Sharon and two other HOA board members approaching the fence at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. I recognized one of them immediately, Greg Patterson, the HOA treasurer, holding a flashlight while Sharon cut. On the third person I didn't recognize, but their face was clearly visible. They'd been too desperate to be careful. I called Marcus. I have Sharon on camera cutting my fence, and the HOA treasurer was with her. Send me the footage immediately. That's criminal mischief, destruction of property, and trespassing. We're pressing charges. What happens now? Criminal charges first, destruction of property, criminal mischief, trespassing. The district attorney will review the video and decide whether to prosecute. Given the clear evidence and Sharon's position as HOA president, I'd say prosecution is likely. And the lawsuit? Their case just collapsed. Sharon's on video committing crimes against you while serving as HOA president. No judge will grant them an easement after this. I will file an emergency motion to dismiss their case and strengthen our countersuit. He paused. But there's something else you should consider. What? Sharon's desperate enough to cut your fence at midnight. That means she's facing consequences worse than criminal charges, probably financial collapse if property values drop. Desperate people make mistakes. Keep your cameras running. She might do something even more stupid. I found the first cow at dawn. She was lying on her side near the water trough, legs stiff, eyes open. It was Bessie, a 5-year-old Angus I'd bottle-fed as a calf when Uncle Jim was still alive. 20 feet away was her daughter, a 2-year-old heifer I'd been planning to breed next season. I ran to them, but I already knew. They were dead. I knelt next to Bessie, putting my hand on her neck. She was cold. Whereas she'd been dead for hours. Probably died sometime in the night while I was asleep, unaware someone was on my property poisoning my animals. Foam had dried around her mouth. I thought about Uncle Jim teaching me to bottle feed her, his hands steady and patient. These aren't just livestock, he told me. They're your responsibility. You take care of them, they take care of you. Someone had killed 2 of my cattle to hurt me, and it had worked. I called the vet immediately. He examined both cows and took samples from the water trough. When the results came back the next day, his voice was grim. Antifreeze poisoning. This was deliberate. Cattle won't drink antifreeze naturally. Someone dumped a large amount in the trough. 2 healthy breeding cows worth $8,000. But it was more than financial. Someone hated me enough to kill my animals. This had started 2 weeks earlier, the morning after I'd filed criminal charges against Sharon Miller. I'd brought the security footage to the sheriff's department on a USB drive. Sharon Miller and HOA treasurer Greg Patterson clearly visible at 11:47 p.m., bolt cutters in hand, cutting through my fence. That's criminal mischief at minimum, the deputy said. Possibly conspiracy to commit trespass. We'll forward to the prosecutor. The prosecutor moved fast. Within a week, criminal charges were filed against Sharon Miller, Greg Patterson, and the third board member visible in the footage, Lisa Chen. Criminal mischief, destruction of property, conspiracy to commit trespass. All 3 were arrested on a Tuesday morning, released on bond by afternoon. And the local news ran the story, HOA president arrested for cutting rancher's fence. The video footage played on a loop, Sharon with bolt cutters, Greg holding the flashlight. Sharon's attorney tried to spin it. My client believed she was removing an illegal obstruction, blocking access to land promised to the community. The prosecutor shut it down. It's not her land. You can't destroy someone's property because you disagree with property records. That's vigilante justice. The HOA board fractured. The 2 board members not facing charges resigned within 48 hours. David Martinez called an emergency election and was elected interim president with 78% of the vote. He called me 2 days later. Can we talk? We met at my ranch. David stood at the fence looking at my cattle. Most homeowners didn't know we were trespassing, like we were lied to by the developer. When Sharon told us we had access rights, people believed her. Sharon knew the truth for over a year. I know, and now she's facing criminal charges, and our community is divided. He turned to face me. We want to make this right. What would it take to give us some access? Not all 40 acres, but something? I'd been thinking about this. I'm running a working cattle ranch. I can't have people in my pastures. But there's a 5-acre section near the creek on the eastern edge. It's separated from my active ranch land by tree lines. I'd consider a limited easement to that section only. What would you want? Fair market value for the easement. All my legal fees paid, about $35,000. Criminal charges resolved, and a fence maintained by the HOA to keep people in that 5-acre section. If residents wander onto my active ranch land, the easement revokes automatically. David called me 3 days after his election. I need to tell you something. I've been going through the HOA's financial records and I found irregularities. What kind? Greg approved payments to several vendors I can't find record of services for. There's a landscaping company that supposedly maintains common areas. We've been paying them $3,000 a month for 2 years, $72,000 total. I called them. They haven't done work for Meta-Ridge in over a year. Where's the money going? I don't know yet, but Greg approved all the payments. There are 3 other vendors with similar patterns. At least $150,000 over 2 years, possibly more. Does Sharon know? She signed off on financial reports that included these payments. And either she was in on it or she wasn't paying attention. The appraisal for the 5-acre easement came back at $250,000. David presented it at an HOA meeting. That's $2,100 per home. It's not the 40 acres we were promised, but it ends the lawsuits. The response was divided. Some were willing to pay, others were furious. We already paid for 40 acres. Sharon launched a campaign against the settlement, posting daily in the Facebook group, "Don't pay the rancher, he's extorting us. We have legal rights to all 40 acres, not just 5. Stand strong." David responded publicly, "Sharon, you're facing criminal charges for cutting his fence." Our lawsuit was dismissed. We're not winning in court. The settlement vote happened 2 weeks later. David needed 75% approval, 90 of the 120 homeowners. On the final tally, 68 votes in favor, 52 votes against, short by 22 votes. David called me after, frustrated. "I'm sorry, Sharon convinced enough people you'd eventually cave if we kept fighting. What now?" "I keep trying, but it might take Sharon's criminal trial to change minds." The community split had shifted since Sharon's arrest. David showed me internal polling. Sharon's hardcore faction, 40%, down from 60%. David's settlement faction, 55%. Undecided, 5%. Sharon had lost support, but her remaining faction was committed. She only needed 26% to block settlement, and she had 40%. Then my cattle were poisoned. I checked every security camera. One camera caught something at 2:47 a.m. A figure in dark clothing climbed over the fence carrying a container. As they passed the water trough, the motion sensor light clicked on for 3 seconds. I froze the frame and zoomed in. Male, late 20s, someone I'd seen at HOA meetings near Sharon. Marcus ran facial recognition. "That's Tyler Brennan, lives in Meadow Ridge, rents his place. No criminal record, works in construction." He paused. "His landlord is Sharon Miller. He rents one of her investment properties. Sharon's tenant had poisoned my cattle. When I sat on my porch that night, looking at my 40 acres, 2 of my cattle dead, my fence cut 7 times, my truck keyed. Sharon's tenant poisoning my animals. I called Marcus. Sharon's tenant poisoned my cattle. I have footage. We'll press charges. Are you okay?" "No, but I'm done playing defense." I paused. David tried a reasonable settlement, 5 acres for $250,000. 68 homeowners wanted it. Sharon's faction killed it. Those 68 reasonable people are stuck paying for Sharon's fight. Right. What if I made it so expensive for those 52 holdouts that they'd turn on Sharon? Electric fence around my entire property. 8,000-volt livestock fence clearly posted. If people keep trespassing and get shocked, lawsuits start flying. Or the reasonable homeowners will blame Sharon for creating the liability and force a settlement. "It's legal," Marcus said. "You're allowed to install electric livestock fencing. As long as it's clearly posted, you're not liable for trespassers getting shocked." "I'm not the villain. Sharon is. I'm just protecting my property." "You're using their bad behavior against them. That's strategic." "Do it." Sharon Miller touched the electric fence at 11:52 p.m. on a Tuesday. 8 hours after being convicted of criminal mischief. I watched it happen on my security camera. She approached the south fence line with bolt cutters, wearing gloves and a hood. She was trying to cut through the electric fence the same way she'd cut the regular fence 3 months earlier. She reached for the bottom strand with the cutters. When the metal blades touched the electrified wire, 8,000 volts traveled through the cutters into her gloved hands. The shock knocked her backwards. She dropped the cutters and fell hard, her head hitting the ground. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. There's a trespasser on my property who just got shocked by my electric livestock fence. She's unconscious. Send an ambulance. When the EMTs arrived, Sharon was conscious but disoriented. The deputy who responded reviewed my security footage. "Mrs. Miller, you were just convicted this morning of cutting this man's fence. What were you doing here at midnight with bolt cutters?" Sharon didn't answer. They took her to the hospital with minor burns on both hands and a concussion from the fall. This had started 3 weeks earlier, right after Tyler Brennan, Sharon's tenant, had poisoned my cattle. I'd hired a specialized contractor to install electric livestock fencing around my entire 40-acre perimeter. 6 strands of wire carrying a standard 8,000-volt charge. Painful if you touched it, but not dangerous. The same voltage used on cattle ranches across the country. Warning signs every 50 feet. Danger, electric fence, do not touch, and private property, working ranch, trespassers will be prosecuted. Cost, $18,000. The fence monitor alert came 3 days after installation. A teenage boy climbing over the fence touched the electrified wire. The shock hit him, and he fell backwards to the ground outside my property. His father helped him up. They both looked at the warning signs, then quickly left. The angry email arrived the next morning. "Your fence shocked my son. This is dangerous and probably illegal." I replied, "Warning signs are posted every 50 feet. Your son was trespassing on private property. The fence is legal livestock containment." No response. The most absurd incident happened 2 weeks later. 8 HOA residents decided to test whether the fence was really electric. They spread out along different sections and, on a coordinated signal, all touched the fence simultaneously. All 8 got shocked. One woman fainted from surprise. Someone called 911. EMTs responded. Everyone was fine, just startled and embarrassed. The sheriff's deputy took statements. "You were all trespassing on clearly posted private property. You deliberately touched an electric fence after being warned. Osh, you're lucky he's not pressing charges," David called me that evening. "The electric fence is making people angrier. Can we settle this?" Same offer as before. $250,000 for a 5-acre easement. You pay my legal fees and maintain the boundary fence. Some homeowners are refusing. They say they were deceived and shouldn't have to pay again. That's between you and the developer. My offer stands. David held another vote 2 weeks later. Special assessment of $2,100 per home, requiring 75% approval. Result, 82 votes yes, 38 votes no. 68% approval. Still short. Sharon's faction had shrunk but remained large enough to block settlement. Then Sharon's criminal trial started. The prosecution played the security footage showing Sharon and Greg Patterson cutting my fence at midnight. Sharon's attorney argued she'd believed she was removing an illegal obstruction. The prosecutor demolished that defense. Mrs. Miller knew for over a year that the ranch owner had never granted access. She knew her residents were trespassing. She chose to vandalize his property anyway. The jury deliberated 2 hours. Verdict, guilty. Judge Morrison sentenced her to a $5,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and 1 year of probation. She also had to pay $2,500 in restitution. That night, Sharon tried to cut my fence again and got shocked. 2 days after Sharon's conviction, Marcus called me. I was reviewing HOA formation documents for the RICO case. Sharon Miller isn't just a homeowner. She was a business partner with Robert Hayes. What? Summit Communities LLC was formed in 2019. Members, Robert Hayes, 80%, Sharon Miller, 20%. She invested $200,000 as a silent partner. She profited from every home sale, roughly $800,000 total. Plus, she bought 3 properties in Meadow Ridge at cost before they went on market. She knew from the beginning the ranch wasn't HOA property. She created the fraud. She and Hayes drew up the master plan together, knowing your ranch wasn't included. She's been lying to her neighbors for 2 years while protecting $1 million investment. David found the LLC formation documents himself and posted them in the HOA Facebook group. The response was explosive. Sharon was the developer's partner? She knew we didn't have access rights? She made $800,000 selling us homes on a lie? Within 24 hours, a recall petition had 97 signatures. Sharon was removed from the HOA board by a vote of 104 to 16. Now, Greg Patterson's trial followed 2 weeks later. The prosecution added embezzlement charges based on David's discovery of fake vendor payments. The forensic accountant testified, Mr. Patterson approved payments totaling $152,000 over 2 years to 4 companies that either didn't exist or hadn't performed services. The money was transferred to accounts he controlled. Greg took a plea deal, guilty to embezzlement and criminal mischief. Sentence, 2 years in prison, full restitution of $152,000, permanent ban from serving on any HOA board. Lisa Chen, the 3rd board member arrested for fence cutting, took a plea deal. 6 months probation. She'd been the least involved, just holding a flashlight. Meanwhile, Robert Hayes faced mounting pressure. Marcus had pierced the fraudulent asset transfers. Hayes settled for $150,000 to me, plus a public statement admitting he'd fraudulently included my ranch in the master plan. The homeowners' class action settled for $1.8 million. After legal fees, the average homeowner received about $40,000. Sharon's life unraveled quickly. Her husband filed for divorce 3 days after the partnership was revealed. I didn't know she was a developer partner. She told me she was just protecting the neighborhood. Her 3 Meadow Ridge properties went on the market within 2 weeks. But now that everyone knew she'd profited from the fraud, no one wanted to buy from her. Her house sold at a $95,000 loss. The rental properties sold at similar discounts. Tyler Brennan was evicted and arrested for poisoning my cattle. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation. And Marcus filed RICO charges seeking the entire $800,000 she'd made from Summit Communities, plus punitive damages. 6 months after she'd led that nature walk across my ranch, Sharon had lost her HOA position, her criminal record, her marriage, her properties, her license, and potentially her entire net worth. With Sharon removed and the community understanding the full fraud, David called a 3rd settlement vote. Same terms, $250,000 for a 5-acre easement. HOA maintains boundary fence. Daylight hours only. This time, 108 votes yes, 12 votes no, 90% approval. We should have done this a year ago, David told me when we signed the easement agreement. Sharon cost this community at least $500,000 in legal fees, lost property values, and settlement costs, all to protect her own investment. The easement was recorded with the county. Named 5 acres near the creek, clearly marked boundaries, HOA, maintained fence. Meadow Ridge residents finally had their open space, not the 40 acres they'd been promised, but something real and legal. My fence stayed up around the rest of the 40 acres. The electric current stayed on. I still ran my cattle ranch, but now I had $250,000 for the easement, $150,000 from Hayes, $35,000 in legal fees paid by the HOA, and clear, legally recorded boundaries. Most importantly, I had peace. 3 years after the settlement was signed, I was working on the tractor when I saw a family walking along the creek trail in the 5-acre easement. A father and 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They stayed on the marked trail, respected the boundary signs, didn't venture onto my active ranch land. The kids stopped to watch my cattle grazing in the distance, pointing and talking quietly. Then they continued down the path and disappeared into the trees. This was how it was supposed to work. Legal access, clear boundaries, mutual respect. My phone rang. It was David Martinez. Thought you should know, Sharon Miller was released from prison yesterday, served 14 months of her 18-month sentence. I watched the trail where the family had disappeared. Is she coming back here? No. She moved in with her sister in Arizona, lost her real estate license permanently, banned from serving on any HOA board for life. From what I hear, she's working retail. She'll never come back to Colorado. Good. Thought you'd want to know it's really over. It's been over for 3 years, David. Anchor, but I appreciate the call. That fight had started 3 years ago with 12 people having a picnic on my ranch. It had ended with Sharon Miller in prison and the county completely reforming how they verified development applications. Let me tell you how we got here. Right after Sharon was removed from the HOA board in Module 4, Marcus had continued digging through discovery documents. He found an email chain that proved Sharon hadn't just participated in the fraud, she'd designed it. The email was dated March 15, 2021, 8 months before Meadow Ridge broke ground. Hayes to Sharon. County says we need more open space for development approval. We're short about 35 acres. Sharon to Hayes. What about the ranch next door? The old guy who owns it? Hayes. We don't own it. He refused to sell when I approached him last year. Sharon. Just put it on the map as future acquisition. We'll figure it out later. By the time anyone notices, homes will be sold and will be profitable. Hayes. County might require proof of ownership. Sharon. Tell them it's part of the long-term plan. They want the development. They need the tax revenue. They won't look too closely. The county prosecutor had reviewed the emails and upgraded Sharon's charges from simple criminal mischief to fraud and conspiracy. The original conviction in Module 4 had been for fence cutting with probation. These new charges carried prison time. Sharon's fraud trial happened 4 months after her first conviction. The prosecution was methodical. They presented the full email chain showing premeditated fraud. They showed her $800,000 profit from the development. They demonstrated how she'd lied to the HOA board and homeowners for over 2 years while protecting her personal investment. Sharon's defense was weak. I believe we could eventually acquire the ranch through negotiation. The prosecutor's rebuttal was devastating. You never even tried to negotiate fairly. You never offered market value for an easement. You lied to your neighbors, sent them to trespass, and vandalized his fence twice, all while hiding that you'd profited from the original fraud. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison's sentencing was harsh. Mrs. Miller, you betrayed an entire community that trusted you. 18 months in prison, $50,000 in fines, and full restitution of $1.2 million. Sharon served 14 months before release. By then, everything she'd built was gone. Her 3 Meadow Ridge properties had been foreclosed and sold to pay the judgment. Her husband had divorced her. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. Her savings were depleted by legal fees and fines. She'd gambled everything on a lie and lost everything because of it. Robert Hayes fared even worse. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay $2.5 million to the homeowners' class action. The fraud debts weren't dischargeable in bankruptcy. The judgment would follow him for life. Meanwhile, I'd used the settlement money to transform the ranch. The $250,000 easement payment, plus $125,000 in legal fees from the HOA, plus $150,000 from Hayes, $525,000 total. I expanded the herd from 30 cattle to 50. I repaired Uncle Jim's 100-year-old barn, new roof, reinforced beams, modern equipment. I upgraded the irrigation system, replanted the south pasture, bought 2 more horses. The ranch was finally what I'd envisioned when I quit my IT job, a working operation that sustained itself. Most mornings I'd ride the fence line checking for problems. The electric fence still carried its 8,000-volt charge around 35 active acres. The 5-acre easement section stayed open to Meadow Ridge residents during daylight hours. Occasionally I'd see families walking the creek trail, kids learning to skip stones, couples having picnics. They stayed on marked paths, respected boundaries, didn't venture onto my working land. This was the compromise I'd fought for. Legal access for them, a protected operations for me. David had stepped down as HOA president after 3 years. We'd become something close to friends over that time. Not close, I still valued my privacy, but respectful. He'd attend my occasional barbecues. I'd help him with property questions. Any regrets? He'd asked over coffee at my ranch last month. About the settlement? No, 5 acres is reasonable. I get legal fees paid, clear boundaries, and peace. You get something for your residents. Everyone compromised. Sharon could have had this deal 2 years earlier if she hadn't been desperate to hide her partnership. She gambled on a lie, I said, and lost everything. Then 6 months ago, I got a call from the county planning department. We're reviewing a new development proposal for land adjacent to your ranch, the planner said. And her name was Jessica Chen, hired specifically to reform the verification process after the Meadow Ridge scandal. The developer, Mountain Vista Communities, submitted plans showing your property as future open space acquisition. Do they have any agreement with you? Absolutely not, I said. I've never been contacted by Mountain Vista or anyone associated with them. That's what I thought. We're rejecting the application immediately, but I wanted to give you a heads up in case they approach you directly. If they put my land on their maps without permission, I'll sue them just like I sued Summit Communities. Understood. After Meadow Ridge, we verify everything now. Every property shown on a development plan must have documented ownership or recorded easements. I'd no exceptions. That's because of my case. That's entirely because of your case. You changed how we do business. The county commissioners passed a resolution requiring verified ownership documentation for every parcel included in any development application. We call it the Meadow Ridge verification requirement. 3 days later, Mountain Vista's attorney called me directly. Mr. I understand there's been a misunderstanding about our development plans. We'd like to discuss potentially purchasing an easement across your property for community recreational access. There's no misunderstanding, I said. You included my property in your plans without contacting me or obtaining permission. That's fraud, not a misunderstanding. We were under the impression the previous owner had expressed interest. The previous owner was my uncle. He's been dead for 4 years. And if you'd done any research, you'd know he explicitly refused to sell or grant easements to the last developer who asked. I'm not interested in selling. I'm not interested in easements. Remove my property from your plans and don't contact me again. We're prepared to offer very competitive terms. I said no. If you include my property in any future plans without permission, I'll sue you for fraud and seek the same judgments I won against Summit Communities. My attorney is Marcus Webb, if you'd like to research how that worked out for the last developer. He didn't call back. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over my 40 acres. My cattle were settled for the night. The ranch was quiet. Uncle Jim had taught me something when I was young. Property rights aren't about keeping people out. They're about having the right to say yes or no on your own terms. Sharon never understood that. She thought she could take what she wanted because she needed it, because a majority wanted it, because it would help property values. She never asked fairly. She never negotiated honestly. She just lied and grabbed and hoped no one would stop her. I'd stopped her. It cost me 18 months of fighting, 2 dead cattle, and more stress than I'd wanted. But I defended my property rights, and in doing so, I changed how the system worked. The next developer who tried to include land they didn't own would face the new verification requirements. The next HOA that claimed rights they hadn't earned would remember Meadow Ridge. And the next county planner would verify ownership before approving any map. One rancher defending 40 acres had protected every property owner in the county. I thought about the easement agreement, 5 acres near the creek where Meadow Ridge residents could legally access nature. It was a compromise. They didn't get the 40 acres Sharon had promised them, but they got something real and legal. I didn't get the complete privacy I'd originally wanted, but I kept my working ranch intact and got fair compensation. Both sides had given something. That's what compromise looks like when everyone understands property rights. Uncle Jim would have been proud. He'd protected this land for 35 years against developers who wanted to buy it cheap and subdivide it. When he passed it to me, I'd made a promise to do the same. When I'd kept that promise, the land stayed in the family, the ranch thrived, and the boundaries were finally clear and respected. Most importantly, I had peace. The county planning director called me 6 months after Sharon's conviction. We've completed our internal review of the Meadow Ridge approval process, Linda Hernandez said. We need to talk about what happened and how we're fixing it. We met at her office downtown. She laid out a thick folder of documents, the original Summit Communities application, the fraudulent master plan, the approval chain. Every person who reviewed this application assumed someone else had verified property ownership, she said. The developer submitted a map showing your 40 acres as open space. We approved it because the map looked official and the development met our open space requirements. No one actually checked whether they owned the land or had easements. That's a pretty big oversight. It's systemic failure, and it's not just Meadow Ridge. She pulled out 3 more files. We found 3 other developments in the county that use similar tactics, showing private land as HOA open space without owner permission, all built by developers associated with Robert Hayes. How much private land are we talking about? 120 acres across 4 developments. Your case exposed a pattern of fraud we'd been approving for years. The county implemented sweeping reforms. The Meadow Ridge verification requirement became official policy. Developers must provide documented proof of ownership or recorded easements for every parcel shown on development plans. No exceptions. Applications showing private land require notarized letters from property owners confirming agreements. Linda hired 2 new staff members whose only job was verifying property ownership on development applications. "We'll never approve another fraudulent map," she told the county commissioners. "Not after what happened to that rancher." The reforms spread. Neighboring counties reviewed their own approval process and found similar patterns. Jefferson County discovered 5 developments with fraudulent open space designations. Boulder County found 8. Across the state, property owners were learning they'd been included in HOA master plans without permission. My phone started ringing. Other ranchers, other rural property owners facing identical situations, HOAs claiming their land as community open space based on fraudulent master plans. Or a rancher in Jefferson County. "They're saying my 20 acres is their nature preserve. I never agreed to this." A farm owner in Larimer County. "The HOA is leading trail rides through my pastures. They say it's in their master plan." I shared Marcus's contact information, explained the legal strategy, walked them through what I'd learned. Within a year, 12 property owners had filed similar lawsuits. 11 won. The 12th settled before trial. We formed an informal network, the Property Rights Defense Coalition. Monthly calls where rural property owners shared information about predatory development practices. We identified patterns, warned each other about specific developers, shared attorney recommendations. The story reached the state legislature. Representative Karen Mitchell from Rural District 23 had been following my case, as she introduced the Truth in Development Act, legislation that would criminalize developers including land and master plans without documented owner permission. She invited me to testify during committee hearings. Developers like Robert Hayes and Sharon Miller treated private property as something they could claim on paper and worry about later, I told the committee. They defrauded county governments, home buyers, and property owners. The only reason I kept my ranch is because I could afford to fight an 18-month legal battle. Most rural property owners can't. This law would protect them before fraud happens, not after. The bill passed with bipartisan support, rural Republicans and property rights Democrats voting together. The governor signed it 18 months after my case began. Any developer who knowingly includes property they don't own in master plans now faces felony fraud charges and mandatory restitution. Meanwhile, Meadow Ridge was stabilizing under David's leadership. He served 3 years as HOA president, focusing on transparent governance and realistic expectations. The 5-acre easement was well maintained. Mulched trails, native plantings, clear boundary markers. Residents respected the boundaries. No more trespassing incidents. Property values had initially dropped 15% after losing the fraudulent 40-acre open space claim. But within 3 years, values recovered fully. Turns out buyers prefer honest communities with realistic amenities over fraudulent promises. The 5-acre easement was real and legal. That mattered more than the phantom 40 acres. My relationship with Meadow Ridge residents improved. Most of them understood now. They'd been victims of Sharon and Hayes' fraud, just like me. Some became friendly. I was occasionally invited to HOA events, attended as a guest. I allowed supervised school field trips to see the working ranch. Educational, controlled, respectful. Good neighbor policy, but with firm boundaries. The ranch thrived. Settlement money from the easement, Hayes and legal fees, $525,000 total. Let me expand operations. The herd grew from 30 to 65 cattle. I repaired Uncle Jim's barn, installed modern irrigation, upgraded equipment. The ranch became profitable for the first time in a decade. Sharon served 14 months before release for good behavior. She moved to Arizona, worked retail, lived with her sister, and she'd lost everything. 3 properties foreclosed, savings depleted, real estate license revoked, marriage ended. Occasionally, she posted bitter social media rants about government tyranny and property theft. No one engaged. She'd become irrelevant. Robert Hayes served his full 3 years, released with $2.5 million in debt he could never pay. Multiple states revoked his business licenses. He worked construction labor jobs, lived in a mobile home. The development industry had permanently blacklisted him. 2 years after my settlement, a different developer tried the same scheme. Mountain Vista Communities submitted plans for a development showing my ranch as preserved open space adjacent to community. The county planning department caught it immediately. "Do you own this land?" Linda asked the developer. "No, but it would enhance the community character." Application denied. Read about the Meadow Ridge Estates case and don't include private property in your plans without documented permission. The developer withdrew entirely. I was invited to speak at property rights conferences, county planning meetings, even state legislature hearings about development fraud. My core message never changed. Developers will lie if you let them. Verify everything. 3 years after the settlement, I was at the agricultural supply store buying fence materials. The cashier looked up as I approached the register. It was Sharon. Our eyes met. Her face went red. She looked down immediately, scanning my items in silence. No greeting, no acknowledgement beyond the transaction. She gave me the total. I paid. She handed me the receipt without looking up. I took it and left. Nothing to say. The past was settled. My nephew started spending summers at the ranch that year. He was 12, interested in ranching, eager to learn. I taught him cattle management, equipment maintenance, property boundaries. "Did people really try to steal the ranch?" he asked one evening. "They tried. They put it on their maps, told everyone it was community property, sent hundreds of people onto our land. But it was always yours, right?" "Always. Uncle Jim owned it for 35 years before me. The deed proved it, but I had to fight 18 months to make everyone acknowledge what the deed already said." "Why didn't they just believe you?" "Because believing me would have cost them money. Sometimes people prefer comfortable lies over inconvenient truths. That's why you document everything, nephew. Ownership matters more than development plans." The 5-acre easement worked exactly as intended. Meadow Ridge residents used it for nature walks, bird watching, quiet picnics. The HOA maintained it beautifully. Residents self-policed, immediately reporting any rule violations to David. Limited access, mutual respect, legal clarity. My legal victory became case law precedent. Miller versus Meadow Ridge HOA was cited in 15 property rights cases across the state. The core principle: master plans cannot create rights over property developers don't own. It helped other property owners defend against similar fraud. I installed a small historical marker at my ranch entrance. This working ranch was nearly stolen through development fraud in 2024. Fraud was exposed, perpetrators in prison, property rights upheld. Let this be a reminder: verify ownership before believing development promises. 5 years after the fight started, I was on horseback checking cattle in the back pasture. I could see Meadow Ridge homes in the distance beyond the trees. The electric fence hummed quietly along the perimeter. The 5-acre easement section was visible. Families walking trails respectfully, staying within boundaries. Everything as it should be. Property rights protected, boundaries respected. Ranch thriving, justice served. Uncle Jim had protected this land for 35 years. I'd protected it for 5 more. And my nephew was learning to protect it for the next generation. The land stayed in the family. That was always the point.